Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the WIT podcast. This is so fun because I'm finally, after years of being friends, getting a chance to bring to you my friend Margot. Margot is a lot of things, but she is for this conversation. What we're really going to be chatting about is her book, Raising an Entrepreneur. And we're going to be chatting about why she decided to write this book, how she has raised entrepreneurs, advice that she would give to parents, to teens, etc. And I'm not going to bury the lead, everybody. After you watch this episode, and if you share it on your Instagram and you tag both of us, and I'll make sure that you have her tags here, I'm going to pick somebody to send a book to. So you too can read this book. So this book is going to one of you. And I know you're going to be really excited because once you hear what's in this book, you're going to want to get it. So let's talk about Margot. This is second edition of the book, right?
Yes, right.
Tell me why we have a second edition.
I did the first one in 2016, which meant I interviewed these people in 2014 and 2015. And by 2020, I realized they were all doing different things. And I just thought it would be really interesting to update it. And so I updated everybody. I added 10 more people who are really interesting. But the other thing I did, if you get the paperback or the ebook is, as opposed to the audiobook, is I added 2 photos of every entrepreneur, one when they were young and one today. And I just love these pictures. And I just love for parents just to see like, oh, this person's like such a big deal. Wow, they were just like an ordinary kid.
So let's talk about why this is the topic that is near and dear to your heart and why you feel like getting these stories out into the world is so important.
Because I feel like so many parents think that their child has to follow the same path they followed if they're going to be successful in life. And I know this is near and dear to your heart also, to let parents know that actually that's not true. There's a whole new path that really didn't exist when people my age and the parents of the kids that you're working with their age, it just didn't exist. And I want parents to know that there's this option for their kids and to let their kids do something that gives their kids joy instead of forcing their kids into this route that makes their kids unhappy. So many kids today are unhappy. So many kids. You read constantly about the number of kids who are, on antidepressants and doing self-harm and considering suicide and, taking drugs for their, to keep them from being depressed. And it's so sad. And I think parents mean well. Parents want their kids to be happy, but they don't know that there's this whole new world out there where their kids can actually do something that gives them joy and make a living from it.
Well, I'm not a parent, as everyone knows. Well, not everyone. If you're a first time listener, you don't know that, but you are a parent. And I'm thinking that there could be some resistance from some parents being like, well, that makes me uncomfortable to let them take that path or to encourage a path like that. What would you say to a parent who's like, I'm wanting this, I want it to be this way. That's the vision I have for my child. That's what feels safe and good. And like, I'm being a good parent if I encourage it.
No, you're 100%. That's the way most parents are. And I can't tell you how many parents I talk to. Oh, what does your kid love? Oh, they love music. And, they're doing so much music in high school. They're taking music lessons. They're in the choir. They're, they're performing. They're this or that. Oh, and are they majoring in music in college? Oh, God, no. They're going to major in something useful. I can't tell you. I have examples in the book. I talked to one parent. Oh, I'm so sad. My son's dropped out of school again, and I'm trying to make him go back. And what does he love? Well, honestly, the only thing he loves is tinkering with cars. Well, he could major in automotive engineering. Oh, no. No, he has to major in something practical, on and on and on. So what is your kid? My kid he hates studying. What does he love? The only thing he loves is video games. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
There's money in video games, and
Yeah.
I want parents to know, like, let your kid find what they love. And, like, maybe they won't become a rock star, but maybe they'll end up writing music videos. Maybe they'll end up, working on a team of people who write music videos. I mean, there's all sorts of things they can do in the field they love if you give them the space and the time to discover it.
Well, I think a lot of the fields that exist today didn't exist back in the day. And so I think there's a lot of nervousness around. I think ultimately every parent just wants their child to be successful and happy. Okay. But that connects to money in their mind, right? That if they have to be able to take care of themselves, and there can be this angst around, can you really take care of yourself if you pursue your passion and your hobby? I mean, obviously I do what I do today because I have parents that let me do that. I didn't even want to go to college, but they did say, you're going to college, but you can major in whatever you want. And I majored in theater because that was my heart. So there I was at Pepperdine University, a theater major, and really happy that that's what I got to do. And I got to study in London and I got to do all these things. I'm not doing theater today, but I always tell my parents,
You're talking.
I talk, I'm like,
You're performing, you're speaking.
Yes. I tell them that. I was like, my parents were very generous and they paid for my college education, which I did take for granted back then, but don't take for granted now. And I tell them that was like an investment in all the speaking that I do, and that I'm comfortable walking into a room and networking with people or getting on a stage or hosting a podcast. So I think if you could share maybe in stories from your book or things that you found out that other people like me, that we majored in one thing, we were allowed to pursue this thing, and then it kind of went on a twisty and turny, but it's turned out okay. Did you see that to be kind of a theme, or did you feel like their stories were very linear?
No, of course. I mean, there were some people like John Chu, who was making videos from the time he was in 4th grade. And now, Crazy Rich Asians and, but that's very unusual. Most people, it's kind of twisty turny, and whatever they're doing, it's great. And one thing leads inexorably to the next, and just like with you, I mean, there's actually a couple people in the book that started out acting and then it, morphed into public speaking or whatever. I also give the example in the book. I'd given a talk at Summit about raising kids. A dad came up to me afterwards and he was sort of distraught, and he said he was so upset with his son, he hadn't spoken to him in 3 weeks because his son just had announced he was dropping out of college to work on this little company he'd started in his dorm room, and his father thought it was stupid and he wouldn't be successful and that he was ruining his life. And I called over a guy who was there who I knew, Craig Clemens, who's made like $1 gazillion and never graduated from college. I said, Craig, I'm going to give you an example of 2 kids and you tell me which one you want to hire. One dropped out of college, worked on his company for a couple of years, ultimately decided he needed some more knowledge about how to run a business and everything, and now he's looking for a job. The other one stayed in school, wasn't inspired by anything, wasn't a great student, but somehow graduated. Which one do you want to hire? And without blinking, Craig said, oh, the first one. And so did the other 150 entrepreneurs in this room. So I would say, even if you don't end up being an entrepreneur, just the fact that you've pursued a passion, that you've put yourself out there, that you've, learned to take risks, that you've learned how to fail, that you've learned how to take challenges, it's going to be great for you, whatever you end up doing.
Well, let's let the listener and the viewer know that you have raised entrepreneurs yourself. So I think that'd be really helpful to the parents that are listening, because our teens know what it feels. I mean, some of them do. I mean, some of them are starting their entrepreneurial journey. Some of them are in them. So they hear me say all the time, failure is feedback. You start at 13 with a business because the risks aren't as high. You get some good experience under your belt. You learn how to pitch, you make logos, you launch a little business, all that's going to help you. Right. So they don't have to be, our young kids, our teens and tweens don't necessarily have to be sold on it. I think they have to be nurtured and reminded that what they're doing is valuable because the world doesn't always approve it or celebrate it. But what about that parent, Margot, that's listening and going, well, Sarah obviously doesn't get it. She's not a parent because I get those DMs. So I know that that's said. Um, but you do get it. And so can you speak to maybe some of the lessons or some of the tools that you had to use yourself or develop yourself when maybe your kids decided to take a different path, or were you always cool with whatever path they took?
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea they were going to be entrepreneurs. I barely
Okay.
knew what an entrepreneur was when they were growing up. And let me explain to your people that for me, an entrepreneur is not just someone with a business. An entrepreneur is anyone who starts something. So it can be an artist, it can be an activist, it can be someone with a nonprofit as well as a for-profit business. So, but I consider both of my kids an entrepreneur, but in a very kind of different way, maybe than people are. So one of them started a band, Magic Giant. Make sure you all listen, best band on the planet. And the other one started a conference series, Summit. So these are both entrepreneurial adventures. And I consider them both entrepreneurs. Austin, my musician, it was writing music from about age 13 on. And it was his passion. We always knew that he would do something in music. We had no idea what, but we knew he would do something in music. He's incredibly gifted in music, and much of the rest of school wasn't that interesting to him. And Elliott's passion growing up was tennis. Also from about 12 or 13, he ended up playing tennis like many hours a day, almost every day of the week. And interestingly to me, when I started interviewing all these parents for the book, I would say over a third of them played sports at a serious elite level and on into college. So I actually believe that you can become an entrepreneur, not necessarily just by starting a business as a teenager, but by throwing yourself wholeheartedly and completely into any passion. And because I think you get a lot of the same skills that your kids are getting starting businesses. And so that translates. Most of the, like none of the entrepreneurs who were doing sports when they were young are doing anything with sports today, but it just teaches them those skills.
Well, we actually, it's fun. I mean, we've never asked that question about how do you define an entrepreneur. That's a fun question to start asking on the pod, but that's how we are at WIT actually. Because our kids, when we say like a business, like some of our kids, I'm using that kind of loosely in some ways. Some are like businesses or nonprofits, but our number one question to our teens when they come to us is, tell us what you love to do when you're not doing homework. What's the thing that your parents have to say, like, stop doing that and get your homework done? Because that's usually the thing that you want to do. And they'll say, like, sometimes they'll say, well, I don't know if I want to, like, I watch cooking YouTube videos, but that's not, I'm like, wait, there's something there. If you are spending hours watching cooking YouTube videos, there's something there. It's like they're already, which just breaks my heart, being like discrediting the things that they really enjoy doing as not good enough, and they might come to us thinking that their business has to be something that they can pitch on Shark Tank in a year. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. I just feel like when you are like very similar to you, Margot, and it's fun to have this conversation with you, is if a child is tapped into something that they're passionate about, that does lessen their depression, that does lessen their self-harm. And that's really important to me. I feel like we all need things that make us feel plugged into life and tap into like our unique gifts and talents that we were given, but we just don't have a school system right now that really cultivates that. They do when they're little. Like, I've taught preschool. So in preschool, it's kind of like, it's cute to have these things that they really like, but then it's like, oh wait, no, we're not doing that anymore. Now we got to get serious in like 5th grade. I'm like, oh my God. Do you agree? Do you see that?
Right. And as my husband says, when you're in 10th grade and your parent says, you really have to work on your geometry because someday it'll be useful. It'll be useful when they have kids who are in 10th grade and they need to take geometry.
So true. And because the math has already changed, like how they teach math now. When I was a teacher and I had to teach math, there was this new way of doing it. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so crazy, because even how like the tears I was shedding at the kitchen table with my dad because I couldn't figure something out doesn't even matter, because there's a new way to do it.
Back to what you said. Yeah, I have two chefs in my book.
Mhm.
And both of them, it wasn't sort of obvious early on that that's what they were going to end up doing. And when they discovered it, and they just fell madly in love with it, and their parents were like, okay. And one of them, Jesse Barber, ended up dropping out of college and going to a culinary institute, and his parents were like, okay, if it makes you happy, and then instead of being like the worst student, he was valedictorian, and
Mhm.
but I just think it's so important. It's kind of what you said, like for parents, if this is the thing that brings joy to your child, tell your child how happy you are that they're doing this, how proud you are of their success in that. And don't worry so much about the grade they get in history or biology or whatever it is they're not doing well in. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they've poured themselves into something that they're working really hard at and getting really good at. And they're gaining confidence because they've got good at something they've chosen. And that's the key, not only to a kid becoming entrepreneurial, but a kid becoming happy.
What do you say to the parent that hears that and goes, well, I wasn't allowed to do that. My parents made me go do fill in the blank. So they have to do the same thing. Like,
Why? like, first of all, like, how happy are you with your career choice? And second of all, like, this is not like the 1970s. Like, the world is different now.
mhm,
There's opportunities that didn't exist back then. And
mhm.
parents have to understand that it's not fair to push their kids into the same path they were pushed into, because it's a different world with different routes out of the paths.
Mhm. I know. I love hearing you say that, because I feel like I can say certain things, but it doesn't, it's not always valued because I'm not a parent, even though I've been working, I work with kids for like 2 decades. But when they hear a parent, you are a parent and now you're a grandmother, and you have two children that are successful in their own right, in their own fields, and you weren't pushing them to do something that they didn't want to do. You were encouraging. I think that's really, I'm hoping that's going to be really helpful to parents that listen. I want this to be an episode that teens and parents listen to together or separately if you want, and then come back together and talk about your favorite takeaways. But I do want to say to the parents, it does take courage to parent differently than you were parented. It also takes courage to go up against a system and a society that values so much, where is your child going to college? What is their, like, I know because I hear the parents say to me, well, I go to these parties, I go to these gatherings, and they're just like, everyone's comparing like where their kids going, what they're thinking. That's like the number one question. And so I just want to acknowledge that to the parent. I know it's uncomfortable to go against something, but I'm going to have Margot dive into the qualities and the traits that has seen in these entrepreneurs that she's interviewed. I think it's really important for our parent listeners to know that when you do encourage these hobbies and these things that light your child up, you are building self-confidence, self-value, and self-worth that will translate to in any area that they end up pursuing in life. That's what I see in our young entrepreneurs. What have you seen, Margot? What traits and qualities do you see the entrepreneurs that you have written about in raising an entrepreneur? Uh, what have you noticed?
Yeah. So before I answer that, I just want to say, so what it says down here is 99 stories from families who did. So I would urge, I mean, it's not just I want to sell the book.
No,
It's,
I know.
so there's 99 stories in here. They're each 2 to 5 pages. It's super approachable and easy to read. And most of them are stories about kids who took a very different path from what their parents expected. This could be because they're doctors or lawyers and they were like the kind of parents you're talking about, or it could be because they were immigrant parents and it's just not what they pictured, and
Mhm.
they like, you're going to go to the school and you're going to major in this kind of thing. And all of the parents eventually, when they saw how, the joy in their children, they eventually accepted it. I can give you some wonderful stories about that. But also I want to say for me personally, my husband and I are both very academic. He went to Stanford. I went to Northwestern. He has a law degree from Harvard. I have an MBA from Kellogg, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, we just thought this is what you had to do. Like we were a very traditional family. Like we were not out there at all. And that's what we thought we had to push our kids for. And it was only later that I realized, you know, no, like you want your child in a school where they can thrive. That's the most important thing. And if they can thrive, they will be happy. And if they are happy, they will do so much better in life. And Austin, my musician, who wanted to major in music composition and sent in all these, you know, compositions he'd written and, you know, auditioned on instrument and stuff, pretty much got in everywhere. And originally he'd applied early admission to NYU, and he almost, you know, and at the last minute, we sort of pulled out the early admission and just made regular. And at the end of the day, he ended up not going there. He ended up going to University of Colorado. And part of it was like, NYU had so many requirements, and he could have got through it. We could have gotten him a tutor who could have worked with him and gotten him through all these courses. It wouldn't have been a very happy experience for him. University of Colorado Music School was lots and lots of music requirements. And then outside the music school, 30 classes, anything you want. So he took public speaking, he took acting, he took African dance, he took poetry writing, he took composition, he took drama, he took things he wanted. He was, you know, he was like on the dean's list every semester. He was so happy. I want to tell parents, like, put your kid in a school where they can thrive. That's what you want for your child. You want your child to go through school happy. And it's the most important thing. And we were just talking last week because the head of the college admissions scandal, not the head of it, the mastermind of it, was just sentenced to jail last week. And I talk about this so much because everyone said, like, you know, these parents that were paying so much money to get their, you know, change their kids' resumes and oh, these parents were helping their kids so much because they're so wealthy. And I'm like, no. These parents, basically what they were saying to their children was, if you don't go to this prestigious school, you can't be a success in life. And if this school knew the real you, they wouldn't want you. So we have to pretend you're different from what you are, because if they knew who you really were, they wouldn't want you there. What a terrible message to give to a child. The message you want to give is, okay, you know what? You're not going to get into this school. And you don't want to go there anyhow because it's not the right fit for you. Let's find a school that values who you are, that can help you get to where you want to go, that appreciates your qualities and where you can thrive. And it'll be better for the kid.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously what I do for a living. So I'm around when our kiddos get those, maybe not the best news to them for this, you know, getting into the schools or whatever. And I keep talking about, and I've talked about on the podcast, you want to go where you're wanted. Like, why do you want to go somewhere where somebody said, you know, we don't like you. We don't like what you bring to the table. Like, why? It's like a dysfunctional relationship. I would never encourage someone to stay in a bad romantic relationship with somebody who was like, I don't want you. And you're just like, but why not? Tell me more why you don't like me. It's like, no, you don't have to do it. Like, don't just go where you are wanted and where you feel good. And I have to say again, to our young kids that, you know, our teens and tweens listening, I also know that it's brave to pick a school that you feel good in, not the school that on that day at your school where you, in your high school, where you get to wear the sweatshirt. They have these like things, Margot, where you like, you get to wear the sweatshirt of the school that you're going to. And then they take a big picture and the school blasts that out to everybody. And it's like, I've talked to our teens and they say like, it's hard because you feel like you should pick the school that's going to look really good on that sweatshirt day. And I said, I get it. I said, I understand that. I so get it, Margot. I so get that mindset because of what the system has created, has, you know, put the kids through.
For the parents, like, oh, I went to Yale, so you should go to Yale, you know, because I went to an Ivy League school. You should go to an Ivy League school. And maybe it worked for them. And
I mean, I like that you listed your resume because I think, because I do know, like, I do know how this world, these people are thinking, where they're going to be like, well, I bet, Margot and her husband were already entrepreneurs. So that was easy for them to let their kids be entrepreneurs. And you're like, no, we did the thing that you all are very impressed by when she listed those names. And she said, it can be different for my kids. And I think that's a very loving thing to do for your children, is to I've always said this, it's been on the podcast before. My parents, I went to 3 different high schools. It was really hard for me to kind of like find my fit, but my parents were so willing to explore that with me. And they let me go to boarding school. I begged. And to this day, my mom will say that was the hardest thing she ever had to do as a parent, because that's not how she envisioned her life with me as a teenager. She thought it would be helping me get ready for, proms and dances and everything in her house, like being with me, not having her child leave the house at 13, 14 years old. Like that was not her plan. So we're not, Margot and I aren't saying to the parents listening that this might be like the easiest thing or comes so incredibly naturally to you. But
so, yeah, so I grew up, my dad was a professor, and I grew up in university towns like Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it actually never crossed my mind that I could have a child who didn't graduate from college. Like it just didn't occur to me that it was an option. Like it just wasn't, it was like, where will you go to graduate school? Like I didn't know anybody growing up who didn't have a graduate degree. And my husband and I both have graduate degrees. And it's just like, that's what you did. And when our older son, Elliott, halfway through his junior year in college, announced he was taking a semester off, I was horrified. And I was like, oh my God, how is he going to be okay? How is he going to live? What's going to happen? And of course, looking back, I realized it was the best thing he could possibly have done, because 1.5 years later, 1 month short of when he would have graduated, he was so interested in entrepreneurship. We didn't know anything about entrepreneurship. We barely knew any entrepreneurs. This is 2008. And 1 month before he would have graduated, he invited 18 young entrepreneurs to go for a ski weekend, because he thought it was just going to be a one-off. He just wanted to meet them and see how they did it. And of course, that turned into Summit Series, which ended up being huge. And if he had, one reason it was such a big deal was it was the first time millennial entrepreneurs had ever gathered. And if he had stayed in college another 1.5 years, not studying classes he wasn't interested in, but that he had to take to graduate, which by the way is one reason he left, was because he looked at the requirements and none of them were interesting to him. So it was the wrong school for him. But if he'd stayed in college for another 1.5 years, the moment would have passed him by. Someone else would have done it. And so, I mean, it's a hard lesson for parents, but it's an important lesson. Like, you got to let go. You got to let them follow their path and see where it leads them. And, all of these entrepreneurs said to me, like, I always knew my parents were there for me. I always knew if I got into trouble, I could go home again. And almost none of them ever had to go home again. But they always said, like, knowing that I had that, back there, it gave me the courage to take risks. And I just think it's really important for parents to let your kids know, like, we're here for you. And, it may not be easy. It may not be a straight line. There may be bumps in the road. That's how you'll learn. It's okay. We know you'll get there eventually. And we're here for you. And don't worry about it. And let them find their path. And it's not it's not the path you can brag about to your neighbors. And that's okay. That's not our job as parents, is, to be able to put like little, awards on our chest because our kids, did things that impress other parents.
Yeah. And we both know people that have done those things. And that doesn't mean that you're happy people. It doesn't, I mean, I have plenty of people that I know in my lifetime that ended up struggling when they got like my age. I'm in my 40s, and all of a sudden they were having a bit of a crisis because they were living a life that was for everybody else but themselves. And they were checking those boxes that they thought they were supposed to check. And I haven't checked any of the boxes that I was supposed to check. So it does catch up to you. Living for other people, or the approval of other people, or the validation from other people, does catch up to you. It's not really why we have this time on this planet. You know, we really want to try to figure out ways that we can tap into our gifts and our talents and share those. And like Margot saying, being a parent that encourages that to come out in your child. Margot, what do you think? What kind of characteristics and qualities do you feel like people develop if they take an entrepreneurial path, or they are encouraged to be entrepreneurial?
Yeah, so I think definitely one, and you alluded to this earlier, one big one is risk taking and your approach to failure. You quoted the Billie Jean King. We don't call it failure, we call it feedback, which has always been one of my favorites. But parents of future entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurial kids, don't punish them for failure. They say, okay, you screwed up, you have to fix it, but what did you learn and what are you going to do differently next time? And how can you, how can this be helpful to you? This learning experience. And so they grow up not being afraid to fail and being willing to take risks, which is huge. I think another thing is being curious, being willing to look at things with new eyes, being willing to think, it's always been done this way. Does it have to? Could it be improved? Is there a way it could be done better? Is there something that's missing from it? Is there something I could do to enhance it? Like what's the missing piece here? Why is this not as great as it could be? Because often that's where companies get started. People like realize that there's this thing that's missing that I could do better. And I think that's a really, really good attitude to have. I think that another thing is just like learning to work really, really hard. Having this sort of attitude that I'm going to keep at it until I get it right. Every single one of them said to me, like, I'm not smarter than other people. I just work harder. The first person there, I'm the last person out. Jonathan Neiman, who started Sweet Green, said, I'm just more persistent than anyone else. We try, we fail, we try, we fail, we try, we fail. Eventually we get it. We just keep going until we get it right. And it's that persistence, that resilience, that just, insistence on doing it until you get it and not giving up, not being discouraged. I think another thing would be, and this is maybe why so many kids end up having been athletes, is just learning to compete, to love to compete, and learning to love to win. And learning, as I said, not to be discouraged when you don't win, but learning like when it's not your A game, like what to do to get to the next level. Like so many of these athletes said, like, before I go into a meeting now, I survey the course, the way I used to. I figure out like who the players are and what their weakness is and where I can attack. And, it's this whole sort of skill set that you learn from competing that I just think can be really useful. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but
no, I wanted us to have that moment because as parents are listening, like this is the wins, the benefits that come from encouraging. I don't know that everyone's going to go off and be an entrepreneur the traditional way, but I feel like everybody can benefit from living with an entrepreneurial mindset and getting into those passions. And I just think you were saying all those, imagine parents that you raise a child who has all of that. Like that's what a gift you've given them. What a gift. Yeah.
And it's actually like my favorite list in the book, if I can read it.
Of course.
I say, even if your child doesn't want to be an entrepreneur, encouraging them to become more entrepreneurial by promoting certain attitudes can only be a good thing. All children thrive if they learn to believe in themselves, to pursue their true passions, to find new ways to solve old problems, to see opportunity where others see the status quo, to be willing to take on a challenge without proper credentials, to work with single-minded determination to achieve a goal, to take on risk if the project is worth trying, to learn that building something wonderful is its own reward, regardless of how much money you make, to view failure as feedback and setbacks as learning experience, and to dream big dreams. And I know this is what you teach all of the kids that you're working with in your programs.
Well, no, I mean, it's so fun to think. Before we go to this thought that I had just had, I do want to ask you and give you the moment to answer the question. You said, could we do this differently, right? That's something that you think that happens with entrepreneurs. It's like you look at something and you're like, maybe we could do this differently, or how could we do this differently? Well, when did you have that moment for writing the book? Because when did that idea come to you and you thought it's worth it to put time, effort, energy into putting this book together, these stories together? What was the catalyst for you to become an author in this way?
It was actually different from what I just said.
Great.
So I'd go to all these summit events that this organization my son had started, which is groups of young entrepreneurs. And I didn't really know any entrepreneurs. This is 2008, 9, 10, and so I'd go up and I'd ask all of them, I'm just so curious how you turned out the way you did. So willing to take on so much risk and work so hard to achieve an end, and they basically all said the same thing to me. They all said, I had someone who believed in me, who told me I could do anything that I put my mind to. Generally, they said, I had a family who believed in me. And even more specifically, they almost always said I had a mom who believed in me. But they all said someone along the way had told them that they believed in them and that it gave them the courage to try. And I was so struck by this, I just kept talking about it all the time. And my kids started saying, you have to write a book. And I said, I can't write a book. And they're like, no, Mom, you have to write this book. I said, I can't write a book. And they're like, you have to write this book. So, and the kids wrote the foreword and they said, everyone has to have someone who believes in them. And sometimes that's even their kids.
So what was the resistance to writing the book? I mean,
I've done a lot of writing, but usually like 2 pages,
So the task felt big.
It just felt enormous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. See, that's a good thing for them to for our teens to hear, our young entrepreneurs to hear. Even adults get overwhelmed with a task at hand, but we just take one step at a time, one page at a time. She wrote,
Right.
1 line at a time.
Right. I would just try to do, 3 interviews a week, and then I would transcribe the interviews. I had no idea what I'd find. I actually, the kids said, before I started, write down what you think the 10 rules are going to be that all the parents followed. And I wrote down what my rules are. And basically I was wrong on all of them. Mine was have a family dinner every night because that was my rule.
Mm-hmm.
Say what time do you eat dinner? And I'd say when the last person walks in the door. But that was me. Very few of these families had family dinner together every night. So, it just.
I like that because that's also cool to be wrong, right? To think, that's also, I love that. I love that. You're like, this is for sure going to be one of the things. And then it's not. And then you're like, okay, well, it did work for your family. My parents, we were very family dinner every night. And I would say the same thing, Margaret. I would have thought that too. That would be like a glue. I benefited a lot from those family dinners and a lot of times that I wanted to leave the table. And my parents are really big on, especially if we had guests over, that you needed to stay and contribute to the conversation. You weren't allowed just to sit there. So that's how I learned how to engage sometimes, even if I didn't want to be engaged, and that was a sign of being respectful, asking questions and things like that. So it is funny, all the lessons learned around the dining room table as a family.
Right. But anyhow, you asked about the whole thing about what was missing. So one of my favorite examples is Joel Holland, who's in the book. And he was in high school and he wanted some advice about, what careers were open, and he couldn't, he went into the guidance counselor. There wasn't anything interesting. And he thought, gee, I wish I could interview sort of, all these famous business people and put it online and let kids see like what these different careers are. So he wrote to somebody and said, could you fund this? And if I can get all these people, and they said, yes, not thinking he would. And he did. So he started doing this. And one of the people he'd interviewed was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he realized it was interesting what he said, but the background was so boring. And he thought, gosh, if only they'd had the Hollywood sign or something. I wonder how you get this stock footage, and he realized it was really hard to get stock footage. So he started a company to do stock footage. And he ended up, and he'd gotten accepted to college. He asked his parents if they minded if he took a year off before he went. He worked on his company. He went to college. He did it all through college, and moved back home with his parents afterwards instead of taking a 6-figure job on Wall Street. And everyone said he was nuts.
Mhm.
And for a couple years, he sold half of it, I think, for like $10 million or something. And got an RV and started driving around the country and I'm just going to chill. And he's driving around the country and he's like, gosh, I just hate all these RV parks I have to stay in. I wish there was like an interesting place to stay, like a farm or a winery. Oh, maybe I could do that. So
I love it.
So there was a little newsletter called Harvest House that had started this, and he bought it from them. And it's like quintupled in size. And, now for like $80, you can get this list of places as an RV, and you can stay in all these interesting places for free. And, and so I love this because here was a guy, he wasn't thinking when he started out, I'm going to start a company about film footage, or I'm going to start a company about places to stay in an RV, but he was just curious. He kept his eyes open. He thought, what's wrong with this picture? What's missing? What could I do better? And both times that was what his company was.
Mm. I love that. We should totally tell the audience that how we met. So they it's just because we've had chats together, but we've chatted about so many different things because of where and how we met, which was on a mountain in the winter. And at it has to have been one of your son's events because you were there. I was there on the mountain, a place called Powder Mountain. And I don't even know. I mean, I just remember sitting and chatting with you in the lodge, but there was definitely like a respect and an admiration and a friendliness for me, where I was like, I want to know more about this person when it came to you. And that was years ago. That was pre-COVID when we met, and we've stayed in touch since then. And I want to thank you publicly for always being so encouraging of the work that we do. I really, that has meant a lot to me.
I love what you
that we met at an event that only exists because your son created it, right? That's kind of fun.
I know, I love it.
that as a result of what he did as an entrepreneur, our paths crossed, and I do want to get back out. It's such a beautiful, I'm so spoiled there. Like, I don't want to ski anywhere else. I only like skiing.
I know, I was just reading an article about how these rich people are paying like $1,300 when they go skiing, so they don't have to wait in lines. And I'm like, they could just come to Powder Mountain. We don't have lines.
I know. That's why I know it's a good thing. People are like, where do you ski? And I say, Powder Mountain, and they're like, where? And I'm like, I almost don't want to tell you where it is because it's really nice.
1 hour north of Salt Lake. We just were there last week.
Well, I hope that we get to have a moment again in person. I'd love to see you, give you a big hug and have another chat with you. But I would just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and hanging out with us. And final thoughts for our parents and our teens listening.
Don't worry, it'll be okay.
Oh, I like that. I was like, and I would even say, like, don't worry, it'll be okay. Just do it. And then you'll be everything.
Right.
Now, where can they find you? Where can they buy the book? Where can they get the book?
Yeah, the book's on Amazon. Make sure you get the second edition, which looks just like this. And I have a website, raisinganentrepreneur.com, and it's got a link also to the book. I'm on Instagram at Margot Bisnow, and that has a link to the book. And gosh, I hope you guys like it.
Yeah. And remember, everybody, what I would like to do, because I know you're going to love it. And I want to get this in the hands of one of you, is that if you listen to this episode and you've got a fun takeaway from it, please share your takeaway, share the episode on your social media stories, tag us, and then we'll pick somebody to send a book to. And please, I mean, I just think for parents and teens out there, it's kind of a silly thing. It maybe sound like a silly thing to say, but educate yourself on entrepreneurship and understand that there's some really wonderful, beautiful success stories. And Margot did a wonderful job capturing them in this book. And it's really fun because you're going to recognize some of the names. We didn't really name drop on this episode, but tons of fun, famous people that you know and that you enjoy are in this book. Some of them are my friends.
But can I just say, it's not all big names.
No, I know. Yeah.
It was really, really important to me. It's half men, it's half women, it's every race, every religion, every socioeconomic background, immigrants, people who've lived here forever, small town, big cities, small families, big families, people with, billion-dollar companies, people with 5 employees, and people who did something for a while as an entrepreneur and then joined somebody else's, organization to start a program in there. So it's not just like, oh, I'm going to be reading about, Bill Gates and
that's very true.
It's very approachable. And again, like Sarah's saying, don't worry about it. Do whatever it takes. Let your kids find their joy, support them, tell them you're so happy that they're doing something they love. And maybe it won't go on forever. But they'll have learned something from it, and then they can go do something else. Nobody's getting into a company anymore and staying there for 30 years. It's just not how it's working anymore. And the entrepreneurial path may be for them. It may not be, it may be too hard. They may not want to work that many hours a day. They may not want to take on that much risk. That's okay. Even if they have some entrepreneurial experience, it will make them better at whatever they do. Even if they become a librarian or a school principal or go to work at a big company, if you are more entrepreneurial because you're used to thinking that way, you will do a better job in whatever you're doing in life.
That is exactly where we're going to end, on that wonderful note, that encouraging note. Thank you, Margot, for being here today and for encouraging all of us that are in your orbit and reading your book to pay attention to those passions and those things inside of us. And then shout out to all the moms and dads and families out there that are encouraging their young people to do WIT and to do something that they're passionate about. So thank you, Margot. Thanks for being here today.